I'm John Lordan, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences on my YouTube channel since 2015. Joining me today are some friends from Uncovered.com.
I'm Rachel Roslett, a forensic psychologist and head of case research and data at Uncovered.
I'm Andrea Cipriano. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I'm a case researcher and content specialist at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we're looking into the 1991 unsolved murder of Jamie Santos from Wheeling, Illinois. Wheeling is considered a village, sitting squarely in the middle of Cook County, while also being a suburb of Chicago. Back in 1990, the U.S. Census detailed that nearly 30,000 people lived in the 9 square miles of the village, making it the optimal place to have an urban and suburban residential mix. The area has always been full of diverse restaurants, coffee shops, and parks, a great place for a single woman in her 20s to live and thrive in. And 27-year-old Jamie Santos was doing both, until one fateful night. On October 28, 1991, an anonymous 911 caller reported that Jamie wasn't breathing and she was turning blue. He said that he was at a payphone nearby, but when the 911 operator asked him when he was at Jamie's house, he had a one-word reply: bye. And then he hung up. Paramedics would arrive, but unfortunately could not save Jamie's life. Police immediately began looking at foul play, and there's some reasons to when you consider everything going on here with the scene and, of course, the autopsy that would happen off of that. Investigators have not ruled out if the 911 caller is actually Jamie's killer or not. Let's turn it over to our case experts to learn more. Rachel, Andrea, what can you tell us about Jamie and how does this timeline all come together?
Jamie was born on June 14th, 1964, to two parents, Frank and Debbie, who loved her with their whole heart. By all accounts, Jamie grew up to be strong and fierce with determination. Jamie was dyslexic, but she never let that stop her. Her family often found her reading the dictionary cover to cover, memorizing words and keeping up with school. In an article about Jamie, the Chicago Tribune described her as, quote, one tough cookie.
As Jamie got older, her love for her friends and family only grew. In her 20s, Jamie lived on her own with her 2 cats, Prince and Bandit, in a rented townhouse just down the road from her parents. She would go over and cook dinner for her parents once a week, and her sister Lori was her best friend. Jamie was also generous with her loved ones and always there for them. We know this through stories that have been shared with the media, namely one that Jamie bought her aunt a whole new wardrobe after she lost weight, and another story where Jamie bailed out a friend out of jail when they needed help.
Jamie definitely had a big heart, and she wanted to share her life with others. The Chicago Tribune quoted someone close to Jamie and said that, quote, if you were sick, Jamie would bring you soup and juice. All in all, she sounds like someone that anyone would want to be friends with and someone you'd want in your corner. With that being said, Jamie wasn't having any luck with romantic relationships, but it wasn't because of lack of effort. Reports detail that Jamie had a lot of boyfriends, but she also had a lot of street smarts and appropriate expectations. So finding the right man proved to be a bit harder than she had imagined. She aspired to be married and have kids.
Her beauty and her street smart outlook served her well as she got older. Jamie, like any young, ambitious woman with big dreams, knew that one of the best ways to live the life that she wanted would be to have the money for an exciting lifestyle. And to achieve this, Jamie started working as a topless waitress, but changed jobs to be an exotic dancer when she discovered that there was more money to be made in that profession.
Now, Jamie never had any formal training in dancing, but as a self-described visual learner, she picked up on what worked and what didn't work by watching other dancers perform. In 1990, Jamie started working for the Elgin-based entertainment company Leather and Lace, where she was there for about a year before the summer of 1991. Then she started dancing for another company called Spice It Up. It's important to note that Jamie had only ever been identified by friends and the media as, quote, a striptease dancer, and that she wasn't participating in any sex work.
When Jamie first told her friends and family about her newfound profession, they were understandably worried about her safety, considering Jamie would often be contracted out to perform at different private parties. So, in other words, she didn't always perform in the same location. She traveled around Wheeling and the broader Chicago area. However, her parents felt much better about Jamie's profession when Jamie shared that she had a male driver with her at all times when she was going from gig to gig, and that this driver was big enough to protect her against dangerous customers. And Jamie also said that she would always leave a party at any time if she felt that something just wasn't right about the situation.
That's absolutely a prime example of her street smarts. As we talked about a bit earlier, Jamie was in the profession for the monetary gain. The Chicago Tribune spoke to some of Jamie's former coworkers back in 1991, and the owner of the Spice It Up company said when Jamie became one of the more popular dancers, she would make up to $1,500 on a busy week, dancing mainly for bachelor parties. It was then that she adopted the stage name Sasha. Friends and family say she used the money she earned to take a few trips to Jamaica. She drove a $25,000 car, and that she loved to shop. Friends also say that her personal motto was that her, quote, place was in the mall. To that end, Jamie always saw her dancing job as a temporary gig. She was even pondering a different career, and she was attending drawing classes at Harper College in the fall semester of 1991.
So it sounds like Jamie, as a young woman, she's finding her way in the world, enjoying herself along the way, obviously making some money. But also, we're hearing about some safety considerations here that I think are important considerations when we talk about the facts, when we get to the crime, actually. One of those, first of all, that she's using a stage name. So obviously, if there is some type of situation with a stalker or something like that, she's got a little bit of a hurdle there in terms of they would likely know her as Sasha. And then, of course, having the bodyguard situation and all that, and working for a company like this is quite a bit different than some cases we look at where maybe it's someone that is doing straight up prostitution. They're on their own out at a street. And quite honestly, you have to worry about the people that they're working for in some of those cases as well. Not to say that I wouldn't necessarily completely rule that out as an investigative step in this case. I think I would bet that the company she worked for was probably investigated with all this. But she's enjoying her financial freedom. She's looking forward to the life that she wants to live, taking some new classes. And it seems that the week leading up to Jamie's murder seemed pretty unremarkable, except for a few things that stick out. She had a haircut scheduled for Tuesday. And then she had a change in her schedule the night before she was actually killed. Can you take us through that week in more detail?
Sure. So on Tuesday, October 22nd, so almost a week before she was murdered, Jamie had a longtime friend cut her hair. Looking back, her friend says that she thought Jamie wasn't quite her usual self that day. She told the Chicago Tribune that usually when Jamie walked into her room, she kind of bounced in, laughing, telling jokes, doing something. But that day she was kind of quiet and a little on the sad side. She had a strange feeling about it. But later that evening, Jamie and her parents had their usual weekly dinner, and they felt that she was acting fine.
And Jamie spent Friday night, which is October 25th, with her sister Lori. And the two of them went to a Mexican restaurant. They played some pool and they hung out until about 3 or 4 in the morning. And the next day, Saturday, the 26th, she worked 3 parties, and her driver said that there was nothing out of the usual that happened. So this brings us to Sunday. And Sundays were often quiet days for Jamie. And this particular Sunday, October 27th, was no exception. She told a friend that she wasn't feeling well, so she canceled her dance bookings and just rented movies while staying in for the night.
Mm-hmm. So the next morning, which is Monday, October 28th, a local 911 operator gets a strange call from a payphone at 11:31 a.m., where a man reports that a young woman isn't breathing in a nearby home. Investigators later discover that that woman is Jamie.
So the unedited 911 audio is available on YouTube thanks to American Crime Journal. Let's give that a listen now.
911, 5. Yeah. Can an ambulance or police or someone to 1765 Stonehenge Court in Wheeling immediately? There's one young woman there who's not breathing. She's turning blue.
All right, hold on just a minute, all right? Because this is Buffalo Grove. Just a minute.
That's okay.
Hold on just a minute, okay? I'm going to try and transfer you. Hold on a second. Hello?
65.
All right, hold on just a minute.
No. There's no time.
Police, Kelly.
Yeah, get someone to 1765 Stonehenge Court in Wheeling immediately. There's a young woman there who's not breathing. She's turning blue.
1765 Stonehenge?
Stonehenge. Hedge like a bush.
Okay, in Wheeling?
Yeah.
What phone are we calling from?
Well, I don't know. It's public phone.
All right, Wheeling, can you hear me? This is Buffalo Grove 911.
Yeah, I can barely hear you.
All right, he's calling from an address in Buffalo Grove.
Yeah.
All right, when were you at that house, sir?
Right.
Sir?
There's a lot of information in that call.
Yeah.
It feels like.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that sticks out to me, it did the first time I heard it and it still does, is this doesn't sound like a 20-year-old kid,
No.
right? Like this is a guy, maybe midlife, maybe even a little older. Like I'm getting the sense this is someone late 40s, possibly into their 50s, could even be someone pushing up into 60s potentially.
I agree. It felt like an older sounding voice. I think many of the reports pin someone at 40 years old or older.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just the way he's speaking and some of the tone of his voice, everything about it just really takes me to that. Of course, we know the big question. The big question is this the person? Is this the person responsible for what happened to her? And around that conversation is some of the logistics of what he's detailing. He's saying, obviously he's seen her because he's describing that she's turning blue. So he was in her house. And as a matter of fact, that's the question that's kind of scares him off at the end was, when were you at the house? That question leads to other questions. When were you at the house and why aren't you there now? Why is he calling from a payphone? I would assume, I mean, yeah, we're talking about 1991. Not quite everyone had cell phones, but I'm almost certain Jamie had a phone in her house. And outside of that, she lives in a townhome complex. There is just homes all around. As a matter of fact, I can go ahead and bring up a picture of it real quick so we can get a little sense of the area. There's multiple families living in these homes, and there's a cluster of these all around this area. So how hard would it have been? Like if this is someone that was coming over to visit her, he knocks on the door, notices the door's open, thinks something's wrong, goes inside, finds her. First of all, I'd be looking for the phone in her house. Maybe you don't want to disrupt a crime scene. You think something's going on there. Run outside, bang on the neighbor's door. You don't run out of that option here. At some point, you would hit a door where likely someone is home.
Right. I think if you're a concerned neighbor or a concerned citizen, you would probably want to stay there and see if there's anything you can do to keep her alive. You wouldn't run down the street and make a phone call to send someone else there.
Yeah. And essentially, he does run down to an area known as Grove Court. I think it's a liquor store that he actually winds up in front of. And this is just Google's walking path. It's saying that that's 0.4 miles, less than half a mile. It's kind of making them walk where there's known sidewalks. Obviously, from the picture, we can see he could have just cut across the grass. She did live in one of these front units here. So he could have just cut across the grass if he was on foot. Other possibility is he's in a car. I don't know which one to kind of hold more stock in, because if he's the perpetrator and he gets in a car, starts taking off from the scene, he has to decide within that first minute, okay, I've done something wrong. I need to call help and try to get someone there. And then what? He stops his car at this spot, jumps out, uses the payphone. There's something in it. I don't know. For me personally, I'm more likely to believe that he was on foot and jumped out to that street, went to the nearest payphone he could, and then probably split from there. Of course, if he's on foot, what's that story? Does he live in this area? So I don't know.
Well,
And you mentioned that. of just like living in the area, because like looking at just the transcript of the call and trying to break it down, you know, he's very familiar with the area that he's in. At one point, the operator asks, are you calling from an address in Buffalo Grove? And he says yes. And then before that, you know, very specifically correcting the operator with the street name, that it's not henge, it's hedge, like a bush. If you're not local, you probably might not even recognize that that was being said, or that it was mispronounced. And even again, going back to the idea that he knew what area or jurisdiction this payphone was in. So that would tell me that they're probably local.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for him to know the exact address, like he knows, think about your friends. How many of their addresses do you know? You know, like my closest friends, I think I know their address. The next circle out from that, forget it. Like there's no chance.
I don't even know my kid's street number. So yes, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's a very interesting thing going on in this. And also something about his explanation about the hedge as in the bush. Like that sounds like something that he's either used to saying, like he has to say this. I've lived on street names that were like ridiculous and there have to be some accompanying explanation, and you get used to saying it so often it just kind of rolls out. That's kind of how his delivery sounds. Like it's something that just rolls right out, or it's something that he heard recently. It could be that maybe she invited him over. That's why he had the exact address. He had it written down. He's literally looking at it. And then he recalled a conversation where she had described it that way, that like, you know, no, not henge, hedge, like, you know, like the bush.
Yes. I had the same exact thoughts. I mean, it rolls right off his tongue. It wasn't, you know, something he thought of after the fact. It was very natural and intuitive to him to say that.
Yeah. So what happens when the emergency services arrive, and then what leads to police's quick determination of foul play?
So fire and paramedics arrive only 5 minutes after that call at 11:36 a.m. They find the door to her house closed, but it wasn't locked. And reports are really conflicting on whether there were signs of a struggle or there wasn't any struggle at all.
Early on, the Chicago Tribune reported that there were no signs of a struggle. However, in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, William Benson from the Wheeling Police Department literally said, quote, "There's evidence of a struggle."
A later article at the Chicago Tribune quoted Wheeling Deputy Police Chief Michael Aramis as saying investigators have all but ruled out a woman as the killer because of the lack of a violent struggle at the scene. Which, what does that comment mean for you, ladies? Because I'm not quite sure I'm following it.
I think Andrea said it best when she said women are going to clean up after they commit a crime, right? It makes no sense to me. I don't know what that is supposed to mean.
Yeah, you guys haven't run into any information in your educations about there being any correlation of women attackers not leaving a struggle?
No. And you know what's interesting? Like now that we're talking about it and hearing it in this context, to me, I would almost think from a physical matchup perspective that there would be more of a struggle if it's a woman against a woman, because there's this like equal and opposite reaction with physical fighting.
Right.
Whereas I could see a scenario in which if a woman is being overpowered by a stronger man, there might even be a little bit less of a struggle because there's more control and dominance on one side of the physical spectrum. Whereas here in this situation, you would think that two women who are probably equally matched at some point, there would be a lot of this back and forth, which would create more of a struggle. And so saying, oh, there's no struggle at the scene means it's a woman, I don't think that makes any sense to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have to say that this article is like from 1992. We don't know that that's still what this department is considering. This is the police chief, who knows how well-versed he was on the investigation at that point. It's being reprinted, you know, told to a reporter and reprinted. Maybe there was something lost along the way, but yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. Something else to point out is how many murders do they have in this area?
Yeah, I was doing some research on that. And when you look at the homicide statistics and the ones that I found, like don't go quite as far back as this, but still you see year after year where there's 0 homicides, 0, 0, 0, and then you get 1. I've never really seen it go above 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it in this context, this was probably one of 2 homicides in the whole year. So they don't see this stuff often.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Interesting. So he also told the Tribune that with the aid of the FBI and Chicago police, more than 100 people have been interviewed in connection with the case. 15 people connected with the case have taken lie detector tests, and investigators have questioned at least 5 people who, back in 1992, he said, remained suspects. This, quote, this investigation leads us to believe the person who called 911 on October 28, 1991, was not the person responsible for Jamie's death, is his determination. Of course, we also have other quotes from Wheeling Police Department with other law enforcement officers saying they think the exact opposite. So a lot of conflicting information here. And there really hasn't been a lot of press recently on this. I think one of the most recent articles I saw was it's at least a decade old.
Yeah.
So I really want to put out there, I think this is a case that could benefit from I don't know if they have a public informations officer. They're probably a little too small for that. I don't know, but this is a case that really needs some cleaning up of the information out there.
Yes, I agree. There were many conflicting pieces of information while we researched this case, and I also think we deserve to get some clarity on some of these reasons they might have determined it was a man or it wasn't a woman. I mean, at face value, some of the things that they're saying made them think it was a man don't really make sense. And also this last part about saying that they didn't think the 911 caller was connected to her death when we know that he had to have been in the room, and we'll talk about where she was found, but he had to have been in the house to know the things that he knew.
Well, there is a theory on this. I've been looking at all kinds of comments, listening to different podcasts on this. There's the peeping Tom theory, which is that this is someone that for some reason was watching her from outside, was able to see that that's the situation that was going on in there, and then decided to call. And that's part of why he can't say who he is, because effectively he's committing a crime in terms of what he was doing to find that information. I think there's also another potential theory in that what if this is a situation where it was a woman that was the perpetrator? What if it was the wife of someone? We know that she's got a lot of boyfriends. We know that she's dancing for private parties. Did a significant other get upset about this situation, wind up stalking her, something along those lines? I'm really split. It could be the perpetrator. It might not be. I think I'm leaning towards it. I mean, the person's giving a description of what's physically happening in the room. He had to be in there for some reason. And why would he have access? And especially in a way that the family wouldn't have known or been able to say, oh, well, she did have this neighbor that had her keys because he would take care of her cats when she was away, or something reasonable like that.
Regardless of his role, whether he committed the murder or not, he clearly is a person who either saw the crime being committed or was there shortly after and could, really provide some valuable information. If he's not the perpetrator, certainly he could provide a description of the person who killed Jamie.
I'm happy you mentioned that, because thinking about, again, like the language that he used specifically about Jamie's physical condition, he says she's turning blue. And to me, this indicates that he could have just said she is blue, right? If he came up to her, if he was a peeping Tom and looked through the window and sees something that's confusing and maybe she looks like she was choking or suffocating or something, she is blue. But no, he says she's turning blue. So that he would have seen her before her condition changed. That's so to me, point. Again, that also indicates that he probably saw her before whatever happened.
Yeah. Very likely. All right, Rachel, let's continue. So
Yeah. So when the paramedics arrive, they find Jamie passed out on the floor of her bedroom. Some reports say that she was dressed in a knee-length nightshirt and underwear, and that's how the Unsolved Mysteries reenactment portrays her, while others say she was only wearing a bra and undergarments. One of the interesting things they found was that Jamie's head was propped up on a pillow.
Propped up on a pillow. That really seems like some obvious sign of like caring about the victim, or that's can you give us some more insight on the psychological aspects of that?
From my perspective, it definitely does seem to be a very caring gesture if we throw out what this person just did. And it really also makes me think that the 911 caller could be connected, because to me, they're showing signs of regret. And the 911 caller, I think even by making the call, there's no reason that the 911 caller had to make that call. If they're the perpetrator, he could have just let her die and not even implicated himself in any way, shape, or form by making that call. But yet, if he is the perpetrator, he made that call trying to save her. It does appear that he's desperately trying to get them to come as quickly as possible. So it says to me that there's some emotional tie or pull to Jamie for the perpetrator.
I know in other cases I've looked at that typically something that would be seen as almost like a burial of certain types, like the way they would lay the body, putting the hands across the chest, making sure that their legs are stretched out right, they're facing up, like those signs of kind of respecting the dead in that way, particularly for someone that you think just did this, usually related to family, at least in the previous cases that I've seen. But Andrea, what do you think about this?
I have a couple thoughts, honestly. My first thought goes to the fact that in psychology, there's this concept of undoing. And so essentially, it's a psychological defense mechanism where the person who is committing an act, whether it's a crime, in this situation, it's a crime, but realizing afterwards that what they did was wrong or hurtful. So in everyday life, undoing kind of presents itself as, being overly nice to someone that you get into an argument with the day before. But in crime scene investigations, undoing it's essentially a visual indicator of trying to erase the crime that happened, because you have a lot of guilt that's built up, and guilt stems from care and not wanting to see something upsetting. So in an extreme case, I think about the Andrea Yates case, where she tucked her children into bed to make them look like they were sleeping. So this is kind of similar, where I think the killer in this case probably felt guilty about what they had done, suffocating Jamie with a pillow, and then probably used that same pillow to prop her up to make her look like she was sleeping, so they wouldn't have to see her dead in front of them anymore. And, I also think of the Karen Bodine case out in Washington State, where she was found in the prone position of lying flat on your back with your arms, next to your side, where the person who put her body there took a car seat. This was in a junkyard. They found a car seat and propped Karen's head up on the car seat, which is, again, like another indicator that it would be a person that's either familiar with them and didn't want to see the individual in a compromising position. So making them look like they were sleeping or just relaxing is better psychologically for the person.
Wow. And then couple that up with the fact that it doesn't look like there was a forced entry here. It's really leaning towards this is someone that she probably knew, someone that was probably close to her, but maybe not necessarily someone her family knew about. I'm kind of feeling like secret boyfriend or someone new in her life, something along those lines. But
yeah, the only caveat I could think to that is, if a person showed up with a weapon but we do, by all accounts, Jamie was super street smart. So, I have no doubt she would have been very careful about who she opened the door to and who she let in her house. So, I mean, that does lean toward it is someone that she was familiar with. But again, someone could have had a weapon and forced their way in, and so they wouldn't have had signs of forced entry.
Yeah. I don't know, for this one in particular, it's just we're not seeing any, like, that would take a level of premeditation that I don't feel like is part of this, particularly because we don't know the motive. There's no sexual assault, there's no robbery or anything being taken from the home. So what's left? Power, right? Which is, I think, why I keep looking at that situation of like, this is a boyfriend of some kind, or this is, a scorned significant other of someone, something along those lines. But then wouldn't, like, if it was someone like that, wouldn't they want to disgrace her more? Wouldn't you be more likely to find her body having been manipulated in a negative way instead of like that?
Yeah, it really is curious because it seems, because there was no sexual assault, because there apparently was nothing taken, it seems like murder just for murder's sake, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But and I think back to,
go ahead.
Sorry, go for it.
No, you go for it.
I think back to one of the conversations we had earlier about Jamie specifically working like a lot of bachelor parties. And I wonder if it's a situation where it's a young woman who is now newly married and finds out down the road that her now husband had Sasha or Jamie at the man's bachelor party and is frustrated and wants revenge that way. That could also explain why there's no sexual assault, because the woman wouldn't have a motive to do that. Her motive would truly just be getting back or something.
Yeah.
So it's not a sexual homicide.
Well, you guys might have the psychology angle. I have the man angle covered, and I can tell you that married men go to bachelor parties too. So it doesn't have to be the guy that got married. It could have been
very true.
Yeah, it could have been someone else that wasn't supposed to be there or didn't tell his wife he was going there initially. But keep in mind, so she's been placed like that. However, when first responders show up, she's actually still alive at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is curious. Which is curious because he knew she wasn't, if it's the 911 caller, he knew she wasn't alive when he left, or he knew she was alive when he left. Why didn't he? So he wanted her to stay alive? I find that very curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole situation is, honestly. But yeah, when the paramedics do get there, Jamie is still alive, and she's taken to the Holy Family Hospital in Des Plaines, where she was pronounced dead with a cause of death due to suffocation. And her autopsy report later details that there were various marks and bruises on her body, particularly in the area under her chin and her neck. And she had not been sexually assaulted, and there were no drugs in her system. So ultimately, the manner of death was ruled a homicide.
So investigators go back to the house and they do a second sweep. They now treat the house as a crime scene, but they find no evidence of a weapon used, only believing that a pillow was used to suffocate her. So detectives impound her late model Chrysler for evidence, but they didn't comment on what they hoped to find in the car. Also, early on in the investigation, the police played for Jamie's friends and family a 4-second clip of the 911 message, but none of them could identify who it was.
So we've got a ton to unpack here. I know we've kind of been kicking out the theories as we go. Just wanted to take a moment. I've put a little list together of possibilities here. I just want to run them by you, see if any of them stick out. Number one, I'm calling it the watcher theory, that maybe this is someone that was stalking her for some reason, maybe someone that lives in the neighborhood. That might make some type of sense. Number two, possibly coworker theory. We know that she's got these driver bodyguards that are with her. Is there some type of situation going on there? Was someone at the company upset about the cancellations that she had made for that Sunday night? Something along those lines. The client stalker theory, which I think kind of rolls in with the wife of client theory. Someone that, she had danced for, they became too attached in some way. They wound up following her, figuring out about her real life, and then invading it in that way. Or a significant other of someone in that same sense. Secret boyfriend theory, or, a boyfriend that the family wasn't really familiar with, I think is a very strong possibility in something like this. Also, don't want to rule it out. I know we have mentioned we don't have any indicators of sex work. I know during the Unsolved Mysteries episode, they kind of do these reenactments and they let the actors kind of freeform, I think, the dialogue a little bit. It's one of the things that they leaned into as well. Just the thought that someone would say, hey, you want to make some real money? Let's continue the party. Could that have been a situation that happened around someone with this type of lifestyle? I think we've seen that time and time again. So I think that we really can't necessarily rule that out as well. Any other angles or different theories that you can see on this?
I think those captured a lot of my thoughts. I did read a quote from a Wheeling police officer that said that he did not believe it was related to her job. If you took it was something to the effect of, if you took out the aspect of her job, it wasn't really that different than any other murder that he had investigated. Now, that said, we've seen a lot of conflicting statements come out of the Wheeling Police Department, so I don't know that we can take that as the truth, but I did want to put that out there.
Yeah, that's something I'm like conflicted with also and struggle with. I know Eric Hickney, he's a social psychologist, and he authored a book on serial murderers and their victims. And he did a study a long time ago where he found that being a sex worker increases your chance of being murdered by 200 times. And so I know Jamie in this case is not a sex worker by the definition that I'm sure he was using, but still being in the adult entertainment industry, being a dancer, it's still a high risk lifestyle. And she's putting herself at risk all the time. So I understand where the police department is coming from of trying to say her lifestyle isn't really a factor here. But I also feel like we can't rule it out at all because it's such a big part of how she's making money and how she's interacting with people all the time.
Good point. So what can you ladies share about the subsequent investigation?
So after the 911 call was initially released, several people did come forward claiming to recognize the caller's voice. However, none of those leads panned out, and the anonymous caller has yet to be identified.
Investigators were able to identify that the call came from a payphone that was about half a block away from Jamie's house, just like we had seen. And the payphone is outside of a strip mall. And more specifically, it's outside of a liquor store in the strip mall. So investigators asked for the surveillance footage from the store. And the video showed a man making a purchase in the store around the same time that the 911 call was made. However, after the video was shown to the public, this man was identified and he was determined not to be the caller. So essentially, he was cleared of any involvement in Jamie's death. And that kind of left investigators back at square one.
A few years after that, Unsolved Mysteries picked up the case, and they aired an episode on January 10th, 1997. Unfortunately, it didn't have the impact that they had hoped for. And while the Wheeling police received at least 20 calls as a result of the broadcast, it's not believed that anything came of the newfound tips. So then in 2011, investigators submitted Jamie's clothing and other evidence from the crime scene to a forensics lab, hoping to find DNA evidence belonging to the killer, but we were unable to find any updates on those efforts. I will say that it was also noted in several articles that they found fingerprints belonging to an unidentified person in Jamie's townhome, and they have never been able to match that with anyone.
So they're obviously checking that against known offender databases, and they're not finding
Correct.
any, which, if we do subscribe to the theory that the caller is the perpetrator, this is not a complex criminal. He probably put himself at substantial risk of being discovered by stopping at the liquor store, using the payphone in that way, when quite honestly, there was likely a phone in the townhome. He could have made the same phone call from there. We've already talked about the different levels of regret that it seems like this person has. So probably, I mean, there's a good chance that this is someone that isn't going to be necessarily a reoffender, especially if he was trying to effectively stop, the path that this first crime was already kind of heading down. So where does the case stand today?
So the case is at a point where investigators could benefit from the public's help. You can dive in for yourself at uncovered.com's page for this case. The address is on your screen, and we also have a link in the description box below.
There you can see all of our sources, the full timeline, as well as access the audio to the 911 call that alerted the authorities to Jamie's murder.
And to your point, yeah, this is clearly a case that needs more exposure. The investigators could certainly benefit from the public's help. I think it's really a matter of getting the right information out there so the public knows how to help them. We've got several people that have looked into this case here talking about it today, and we can't even really clearly tell if there was, a struggle that happened in the room, what she was actually wearing. Yes, we know her head was on a pillow, but what was the position of the rest of her body? Is there any other critical piece of information we could put out in the public to really help this investigation? That really kind of comes back to the Wheeling Police Department. So I'm just hoping maybe, the Chicago Tribune could reach out, do some kind of update. There just needs to be focus brought back to this case. So I already appreciate you guys being here with us today and watching and learning about this. Please share this video and our page at uncovered.com with any friends, family, or acquaintances that you have that live in the greater Chicago area. But of course, the biggest help is if you know something, say something. You could submit tips to the Wheeling Police Department by calling 847-459-2632. If you need to remain anonymous, please contact CrimeStoppers at 512-472-8477 or by using the CrimeStoppers app. And I do want to give a thank you to the Wheeling Police Department. I know we've held them under some scrutiny in terms of what we're seeing around this case and all the information that's flowing around it, but we know they don't have an easy task with this, and this might be an instance where this is a relationship no one knew about. It might not even be someone that strongly connected to her. This is a tough case. So we get that there's a big challenge here. Also, a big thank you to Unsolved Mysteries, the Chicago Tribune, the Trail Went Cold podcast, Who Done It podcast, the Daily Herald, Wheeling Countryside, CBS News, Chicago Sun-Times, the Wheeling Journal, True Crime Diva blog, NBC5, WMAQ-TV, Web Sleuths, Reddit, and Wikipedia. Also, a big thank you to my friends at uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Rachel Roslet and Andrea Cipriano. Please come back, join us again in 2 weeks as we look into another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.